so much for joining us. It has been a busy week and a lot has happened. In Iran, there have been huge protests over the killing of a young woman after she was arrested by their morality police. We also learned that Adam Levine is as bad at sexting as he is at coming up with meaningful tattoos. And Joe Biden declared the pandemic over, which isn't just irresponsible, it's complete bullshit. You can't just declare something and make it a reality. If I declare the Queen is alive, that doesn't make it true. We all know she's in the afterlife now, looking up at Diana. But we're going to start with Ron DeSantis, Florida governor and Playmobil figurine inspired by a detailed HR complaint. DeSantis made headlines recently after doing this.
This morning, a surprising scene in Martha's Vineyard. 2 planes filled with about 50 migrants landing on the island.
50 undocumented migrants, including several children, arriving in Martha's Vineyard, flown in by Florida Republican governor and presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis, an effort to turn the spotlight to immigration just 2 months before the midterm elections.
Yeah, it certainly was a surprising scene on Martha's Vineyard, which, to be honest, sounds like a romance novel designed to make you cum pumpkin spice. And look, obviously, sending a group of migrants there was extremely reckless because Martha's Vineyard isn't set up with any of the key resources that migrants need, unless, for some reason, they're desperate for a fishmonger to over-describe what it was like to sell Jackie O a pound of scallops in 1983. And if this seems like a stunt made for Fox News, you are absolutely right. But it also may have been made by Fox News. Because just 2 months ago, Tucker Carlson did a segment pointing out the whiteness of Martha's Vineyard, and he had this fun proposal.
They are begging for more diversity. Why not send migrants there in huge numbers? Let's start with 300,000 and move up from there.
OK, first, Martha's Vineyard is an island that has a year-round population under 20,000. So suggesting sending 300,000 people there is a little like suggesting you let Tucker Carlson bring you to sexual completion. It isn't just a disgusting idea, it's a logistically impossible one. But it seems DeSantis just took that idea and ran with it. So I guess it is true what they say. Good artists borrow, great artists steal, and racist governors get their ideas yelled at them by the human equivalent of the boat shoe found at the scene of a hazing death. This stunt was both grim and deeply cynical, especially given that the migrants were reportedly lured there with empty promises of jobs and housing, and even handed brochures listing government assistance that they were not eligible for. In fact, that brochure was so sloppily designed that while it featured a flag for Massachusetts, that's not the state's actual flag. This is the real flag. That is just a fake flag they found from this post online, made by somebody who said, and I quote, "The current one blows, so I made this one." The Boston Globe actually tracked down the guy who made it, who said no one had seen this flag until some idiot staffer for DeSantis or whoever stumbled across it. I cannot fathom why they would use the wrong one, adding, "This is all hilarious, although at the same time deeply sad, because the real story is asylum seekers being exploited and human trafficked," which is absolutely true. Also, you would think Ron DeSantis might have caught that error, given that he spent 3 years at Harvard Law School, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, in fucking Massachusetts. I really hope DeSantis paid more attention to the law part of law school, especially as it seems like he might well need it right now, given that a Texas sheriff has opened a criminal investigation into the migrants' trips to Martha's Vineyard. And if you're thinking, hold on, why a Texas sheriff and not a Florida one? Well, it turns out, for all DeSantis' talk about the urgency of this issue for his voters, these migrants didn't even come from his state. Why not? You know what? I'll just let him explain.
The problem is we're not seeing mass movements of them into Florida. So you end up with a car with maybe 2, and if we know that that's illegal and there's someone that's kind of smuggling, then committing crime, then you can do arrests. There have been drug seizures. But that's not effective enough to stop the mass migration, but it's just coming in onesie-twosies.
Okay. First, onesie-twosies? These are real people's lives, not a baby's fucking toes. But second, it seems this huge problem for his state, mass migration, is actually so little of a problem. He had to borrow 50 migrants from a state halfway across the country. But still, you know what, credit where it's due. Nothing says I'm against illegal immigration and human trafficking quite like making fake documents to smuggle people across a border. And look, We could spend the rest of this show talking about DeSantis and why he always looks like he's wearing a suit under his suit. But there is also an urgent crisis going on in Puerto Rico.
This morning, Puerto Rico in the dark after powerful winds from Fiona knocked out power to nearly everyone on the island.
In Utuado, in the center of the island, this new metal bridge, built just 4 years ago after Hurricane Maria, was swept away like a twig.
Holy shit, that is devastating. When you hear that something has been swept away like a twig, you expect that something to be Timothée Chalamet in a light breeze. Not a large piece of infrastructure in a river. Now, one remarkable thing about the current devastation in Puerto Rico is that while it's reminiscent of what happened there 5 years ago with Hurricane Maria, that hurricane made landfall as a Category 4 storm, whereas Hurricane Fiona was just a Category 1. And that speaks to the fact that the recovery from Maria has been a complete shambles, from the moment that Trump flung paper towels at people to right now. There have been unforgivable delays in strengthening infrastructure like the power grid there, despite billions of federal dollars being allocated to it. And about that power grid, after years of mismanagement by the island's publicly owned utility, in 2021, a private company called Luma Energy took over operations. But incredibly, since then, things have only managed to get worse. Not only are outages now even longer, at one point, a hospital lost power for 16 hours, and that was during normal weather. Now, as for the head of Luma, in a congressional hearing last year, he didn't seem especially concerned about how things were going.
How would you characterize Luma's transition to managing Puerto Rico's electrical grid so far, with 1 being a total disaster and 10 being a remarkable success?
When I look at it on balance, I would give us, a B. I think we have a lot to do.
Okay, so 1 to 10, you would give yourself like a 6?
I'd give myself I'd give us a 7, considering what we do.
7. Okay, how many blackouts have been reported since Luma took over on June 1?
The system has a very large number of outages, Congresswoman, both
Can you
before and
even
after.
count them? Is it so big you can't even keep track of them all?
There are outages every single day.
Okay, that is a terrible answer. First, you absolutely should be keeping tracks of the outages happening on your watch. Second, the question was based on a scale of 1 to 10, and you answered B. And finally, a 7 out of 10 would be a 70% grade, but that's actually a C-. So if I were to grade your ability to grade yourself, I'd give you a 2 out of 10, which for the record is a fucking F. Honestly, I don't know why you didn't just leave that Zoom immediately and blame it on a blackout. After all, you're the CEO of Luma Energy. It would have been entirely believable. And while Luma has repeatedly promised over the last year that things are improving, even before Fiona hit, there were clear signs of trouble. Just look what happened when the governor there, Pedro Pierluisi, spoke to discuss plans for the coming storm. You don't need to know what he's saying here. You just need to watch what happens.
Tras el aviso de la tormenta tropical, como ya se ha informado, el ATSEF comenzó el proceso ayer para adelantar los beneficios del PAN a los beneficiarios.
Yeah, that's not great, is it? I don't know what's worse there, the fact that the power went out in the middle of his press conference about storm preparedness, or the fact that no one in the room seemed that surprised. The only way that could have been any more ominous is if, when the lights came back on, Michael Myers was standing right behind it. People have been understandably furious in Puerto Rico for a while now. There have been street protests with people making protest signs out of appliances that were ruined during power surges. And just watch this reaction at a Bad Bunny concert in San Juan when he called Luma out.
Luma pa'l carajo.
Wow. It says a lot about how much people hate that company that elicited the kind of crowd response you'd normally expect when someone announces something like everyone gets a free car or Henry Kissinger has died. Bad Bunny has actually been trying to draw attention to Puerto Rico's problems for a while now. In fact, just last Friday, he released a new music video for his song El Apagón, which literally translates to The Blackout. But around a minute into the video, there's a pretty significant tonal shift.
Ay, tierra de Maelo y Teo Calderón y de Barea el que fue campeón. Primero que LeBron.
Puerto Rico sigue sufriendo apagones que dejan a decenas de miles sin luz. Esta explosión dejó a todo Puerto Rico a oscuras en abril. Y en agosto, uno de los hospitales principales del país estuvo casi 20 horas sin electricidad.
Yeah, Bad Bunny suckers you in with a song and then hits you with, and this is true, a 20-minute deep dive documentary featuring the reporting of a local investigative journalist, and it is legitimately well done. There is infographics of donations to politicians and an explanation of Act 22, the Puerto Rican law that lures wealthy investors to the island with the promise of no capital gains taxes. Honestly, the video is sort of like this show where you think you're getting something fun before getting tricked into essentially watching Homework, the television show. Also, like Bad Bunny, I too am young and hot. I'm young and I'm hot and going places like my peer, Bad Bunny. We're more similar than we are different. The point is, people in Puerto Rico are justifiably fed up, and they are making it very clear that they're not going to stand for this much longer.
You know that if Luma Energy doesn't do what it should be doing, it better get ready. Because Puerto Ricans are nice people. But when we get irate, you better scramble to board a plane and say bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Exactly. And look, if I'm the head of Luma, I don't know exactly how nervous I should be right now, but if you ask me on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd probably say a fucking shitload. And now, this.
And now, the cue to end all queues.
In London, people are continuing to queue for hours to pay their respects to the Queen, who's lying in state at Westminster Hall.
The late Queen has done us proud. She's brought the country together. She's brought together probably the best British queue of all time.
What I've loved about this queue is that it's a great equaliser. No matter your job, your class, your age, your status, you line up with your fellow Brits.
We didn't used to be good at queuing. We were famous for rioting and cutting kings' heads off.
It's become this gargantuan human snake sort of engorged on bouquets of flowers and a million mini Paddington bears.
So many people turned up to pay tribute, they had to close the queue and put them in a holding pen in another queue.
If people don't feel the urge to queue, what does it say about them?
The Brits love a queue, but this was the queue of all queues.
This queue is different to all other queues I've ever been in.
It's the queue to end all queues.
I've spoken to people who had no intention of joining the queue. They just got sucked into it, such is the seductiveness of the queue.
Moving on. Our main story tonight concerns Brazil, the only country whose flag lets a little circle wear a fancy sash. Isn't that nice? The circle's all dressed up for its big day being on the flag. Brazil is one of the largest democracies in the world, with more than 156 million people eligible to vote. And next Sunday, it's having a massive election. We've mentioned Brazil's elections on this show before, partly because campaign ads there can be spectacular, like this one from a man currently running for state deputy.
I'm Samurai Taxi Driver. You can find me around Pernambuco. 10554.
Excellent. Look, I don't know anything about nunchucks. I don't know if they are historically a part of samurai taxi driver culture, and I don't know if using your armpits so much is usually a part of it, but I will say this. I'm impressed that he spent so much time learning to use them, but seemingly zero time learning how to edit out the part of the video where he turns his phone off. Many elected positions are on the ballot in Brazil next Sunday, from governors to senators. But the key one is the office of president, where Jair Bolsonaro is running for re-election. Now, you may remember 4 years ago, we actually discussed his first presidential run, I assume. I don't watch this show. But if you missed it, a quick recap. Bolsonaro is a right-wing ex-military populist who, when in Congress, told a female colleague, "I wouldn't rape you, you're not worth it," has said, "I would prefer my son to die in an accident than to have him be gay," and loves making finger guns all the fucking time. Basically, Bolsonaro campaigned as a misogynistic homophobe who gestures like he runs a tech startup. But now, he's campaigning as an incumbent president. And he's been drawing on all the perks of the office, including recently turning the 200th anniversary of Brazilian independence into what was essentially a campaign rally for himself.
His rally in Brazil's capital city, Brasilia, drew tens of thousands of supporters and a military display of planes, parachutists, and tanks. Even the embalmed heart of monarch Dom Pedro I who declared Brazil's independence from Portugal 200 years ago, was brought over from Europe to be on display.
Wow. First, if you were wondering what Dom Pedro I died of, it was probably his heart looking like that. But it's true, they put a 2-century-old heart on an Air Force plane and flew it to Brazil. It is actually the first unnaturally preserved human body part to fly on a military jet since all of Tom Cruise. Bolsonaro's main opponent in this election is former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. He was incredibly popular while in office, but later got caught up in the international corruption investigation Operation Car Wash, even landing in prison during Brazil's last election, so he couldn't run. But his conviction has since been annulled, and polls now consistently show him leading the race by a wide margin, about 10%. But the concerns in Brazil are that if, as seems likely, Bolsonaro loses, he won't give up his office without a fight, and could even follow Trump's example in encouraging supporters to back a tropical version of the Capitol riot. Which isn't great, although for the record, you really don't have to use the word tropical to describe an insurrection just because you're talking about Latin America. Especially because tropical riot sounds like a Mountain Dew flavour that was recalled for blinding several children. And Bolsonaro's version of January 6th could be a lot more destructive than Trump's, given that he has done a great deal to cultivate support within his military, all of which makes it more than a little concerning when he stands in front of his supporters and says things like this.
There are only 3 alternatives for me: to be arrested, to be killed, or to be victorious. And I tell those scumbags, I will never go to jail.
OK, that is never a good omen, is it? No one says that before doing something pleasant. No one says their options are victory, prison or death before they say march into the Great British Bake Off tent for Biscuit Week. Not even the German guy, and honestly, I was half expecting that from him. The first round of the election is next Sunday. And if no one wins more than 50% of the vote, it will go to a second round on October 30th. Although, worryingly, Bolsonaro has already said that if he doesn't win outright next Sunday, receiving at least 60% of the vote, something, quote, abnormal took place. So if one of the world's biggest democracies seems like it might be barreling towards a cliff, tonight, let's talk about Jair Bolsonaro, the man with his foot planted firmly on the gas. And let's start with the fact that, unfortunately, he's governed pretty much exactly how he said he was going to. He's followed through on a big campaign promise to make guns more freely available in Brazil, loosening gun laws to the point that since he took office, the number of guns in private hands has doubled to nearly 2 million, despite polls showing the majority of Brazilians are against making the sale and possession of weapons easier. So he is giving people something they didn't ask for and don't want, which I believe is also the job description for the head of original programming at Netflix. But much more than that, Bolsonaro has been an absolute disaster for the Amazon, a rainforest that is critical for Brazil and, you know, the planet Earth. He has loosened regulations to expand logging and mining there and massively scaled back protections and enforcement. And almost immediately after he took office, conditions deteriorated.
Under Bolsonaro, deforestation is at its highest point in a decade, with an area 10 times the size of New York City destroyed through October this year. And in August, there was an average of 1,000 fires every day.
1,000 fires a day? That is so many fires. If you ask me what happens in the Amazon 1,000 times a day, my first guess would be capybaras fucking. Self-explanatory. My second would be frog birthday parties. Statistically, there's got to be at least 5,000 of them with a birthday every day, and we have to assume that some combine parties for convenience and others just don't want to have a big thing this year. But exactly 0 of my guesses would be fires. These fires are often part of illegal deforestation to clear areas for industrial uses. Deforestation, incidentally, which can encroach on land where indigenous people live. And they have been forced to confront these loggers, ranchers and miners on their own, which can be both very dangerous and deeply dispiriting.
When we confront them, they say, "Don't you watch the news?" Bolsonaro said that when he won, we could take wood from indigenous land. This is what they say to us.
Right. And it has got to be tough to fight someone taking your stuff when they feel they've got permission from the most powerful person in the country. If I stole your wallets and then played a clip of Biden saying, hey, John, I don't give a shit if TV hosts rob their audience members. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got to go and say 10 wrong or weird things in a row on 60 Minutes, there really wouldn't be much that you could do about it. The point is, the destruction of the Amazon under Bolsonaro has been devastating. In fact, while worldwide greenhouse gas emissions plummeted by almost 7% in 2020 due to the pandemic, Brazil's emissions actually grew by nearly 10%. And Bolsonaro has added insult to injury, claiming those fires in the Amazon were false flags, accusing outsiders of being part of a nefarious plot to seize Brazil's jungles, and directly accusing Leonardo DiCaprio of funding arson in the Amazon, which is just absurd. Where would Leo find the time to do that between his busy film schedule, his daily yacht fuck, and having a big laugh at every tweet about his May to December love life? Oh man, the internet got me again, Leo shouts to the richest people on the planet over a bottle of wine that costs more than your rent. But perhaps the defining catastrophe of Bolsonaro's presidency has been his handling of the COVID pandemic. Brazil has suffered massively. Over 34 million cases and over 685,000 deaths. And right from the start, he refused to take it seriously, initially dismissing COVID as a little flu, and then once the death toll started rising, shrugging off responsibility in the most dickish possible way.
Tudo agora é pandemia.
Everything is about the pandemic nowadays. We have got to stop with this. I'm sorry for the dead. I'm sorry, but we're all going to die one day. Everybody here is going to die. We have to stop being a country of sissies.
Wow, that is just monumentally shitty. I've got to say, America's COVID response left a lot to be desired. But at least the CDC slogan was never, what are you complaining about? Death comes for all of us. Man up and die in a hole. But Bolsonaro didn't just abdicate responsibility for fighting COVID. He actively made it worse, attacking governors and anyone else who promoted shutdowns or social distancing. In fact, to the extent that lockdown orders were issued at all in Brazilian cities, they sometimes came from very surprising places.
The situation has become so serious that the drug gangs that rule this slum and other slums in Rio de Janeiro have decreed a lockdown, and they have forbidden all clandestine parties from happening.
It's true. Drug gangs ended up being more responsible when it came to COVID than the Brazilian government. Although, let's not give them too much credit for banning parties. You know what is pretty appealing when you're stuck inside with nothing to do and nowhere to go? Drugs. And what is so frustrating here is that Brazil was better positioned than many other countries to handle COVID. It has a long history of successful inoculation drives, starring their beloved vaccine mascot, Zagatina, who at best looks like a super sperm, and at worst, a clan member all dressed up for jazzercise. And yet Bolsonaro not only sowed doubts about the vaccines, his administration delayed ordering doses for months. In fact, last year, Pfizer apparently reached out to the Brazilian government 81 times trying to set up a deal to provide doses of vaccines, but most of the time got no answer. And some of those emails from Pfizer were just sad. One read, "Hope all is well with you. I just wanted to confirm that you received yesterday a communication sent on behalf of the president of Pfizer with the updated proposal of a possible supply of COVID-19 vaccines. Will you let me know?" And come on, Pfizer, if you're getting ghosted like that, you've just got to be more blunt. Something like, "Attention, dickheads, your country has COVID, we have a vaccine, let's do this thing." Or even, "Earth to President bitch, stop subtweeting Leonardo DiCaprio and answer your fucking phone." And the thing is, it is not like Brazilians didn't want vaccines, proven by the fact that once they finally became available, virtually 100% of the adult populations in Rio and Sao Paulo got fully vaccinated, a number that no American city has managed to hit. And the COVID debacle would be comfortably enough for people to be done with Bolsonaro, but there is so much more, including the fact that despite running on an anti-corruption platform 4 years ago, Bolsonaro and his inner circle have since become engulfed in a growing number of criminal and legislative investigations. And while he has denied wrongdoing, one sign of just how touchy he is about these allegations is that when a journalist asked him about one of them, he replied, "I feel like punching you in your mouth." Okay? So it is just no wonder that he is trailing in the polls, which is not to say that Bolsonaro does not have his supporters, because he very much does, and they can be intense.
Thousands of supporters lined up in front of this gym next to Rio de Janeiro's iconic Maracanã football stadium. Inside, crowds wearing the colors of the Brazilian flag cheer for President Jair Bolsonaro, calling him the Messiah and the myth.
Okay, I love that man. I love his outfit, I love his face paint, I love the way he kind of looks like the Hulk losing his shit at a Green Bay Packers game. But what I love most of all is what appears to be a security guard over his shoulder, scanning the crowd for threats while looking everywhere but at the bright green man right in front of him, screaming so hard he might explode. And Bolsonaro seems to be deliberately laying the groundwork with his supporters for an eventual Trump-style refusal to accept the election results, even pointing to our last election as a cautionary tale for Brazilians.
What happened in the American elections? Basically, the problem, the cause of this crisis, was the lack of trust in the vote. There were people who voted 3-4 times. Dead people voted. It was a mess.
Okay, great. So that is the January 6th op-ed absolutely no one needed, from the man no one wanted to hear it from, and from the camera angle that absolutely no one deserves. He's saying his stupid opinions out loud. You really don't have to go hunting for them right up his nostrils. Bolsonaro has been going out of his way to undermine faith in Brazil's election system, suggesting judges and officials are trying to sabotage his re-election, and fear-mongering about the country's electronic voting machines. Machines, incidentally, which are even the subject of ASMR election PSAs like this one.
Urna eletrônica, ASMR. Você ainda tem dúvidas sobre as eleições? Estamos aqui para descomplicar. E a pergunta da vez é: por que votar?
Horny. You know, every day there are millions of people experiencing their own personal sexual awakenings. And I'm guessing that today, at least one of them discovered that softly fondling Brazilian voting machines is apparently their thing. Welcome to the rest of your life. But Brazil's voting machines aren't just quietly erotic. They're also widely seen as secure. They are not connected to the internet, which makes them all but impossible to hack. And it's worth knowing that since their introduction in 1996, authorities have never found any evidence of widespread fraud. Yet Bolsonaro has repeatedly attacked the machines as crooked, claiming that his margin of victory in 2018 actually should have been even larger. He even subjected a room full of diplomats to a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation accusing Brazil's elections of being rigged. And that is incredibly dangerous, partly because people will agree to anything if you threaten them with a 45-minute PowerPoint presentation. In our office, we have an email security seminar once a year, and this year I broke my laptop with a hammer just so I could claim that it did not apply to me. It was the right call, and I will do it again. And look, I don't want to waste too much time knocking down every one of Bolsonaro's complaints, because it's pretty clear that in raising these objections in the run-up to the election, his intention isn't to maximise the security of the vote, but to maximise the amount of distrust that people have in it. And his supporters have been very much listening to his bullshit.
If the elections are fair, he wins in the first round, only in the first round.
He will only lose the election if there is fraud, and the people will take to the streets to stop that from happening.
You see, that's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at that man, you'd think, oh, he loves Brazil. But if you listen to him, you'd learn he's willing to burn his country to the ground based on a flimsily laid conspiracy theory. But I guess that duality is just part of the boundless mystery and contradiction that makes human beings the absolute fucking worst. And given Bolsonaro's rhetoric, it is no wonder that there have already been outbreaks of violence. One Lula supporter was killed when a Bolsonaro supporter invaded his Lula-themed birthday party and shot him while shouting that all PT partisans, that is, supporters of Lula's political party, will die. So things are very tense right now in Brazil, and that is before you consider just how close Bolsonaro is to the armed forces there. Not only is he ex-military, and not only has he expressed admiration for the military dictatorship that ran the country until 1985, his government is also heavily stocked with military personnel, and some leaders of Brazil's armed forces have raised similar doubts to Bolsonaro's about the integrity of the elections, all of which has led some in Brazil to understandably worry about what lies ahead.
Esse flerte
This flirting of President Bolsonaro with the coup is not a recent thing. It's an old thing. The people that support him are willing to do anything, just like the supporters of President Donald Trump when the Capitol was invaded. I have no doubt, I have even written about it, that here in Brazil we will have a tragic, dramatic repetition of what happened there.
Yeah, except crucially, it could be much worse there. Because luckily for us, Trump's allies were generally limited to a shirtless man in a fur hat, a perpetually hoarse pillow baron, and some of his dumber children. But Bolsonaro has significant military support, and there is some question of what they might do in the event of an uprising, which raises the stakes significantly. Generally, when someone threatens democracy, it's a lot easier to say, you and what army, when you're absolutely certain that that person doesn't have an actual army behind them. The point is, for Brazil, there is a lot on the line here. And right now, it seems the most likely scenario is that no one will win outright next Sunday, meaning that both Bolsonaro and Lula head to a runoff on October 30th. But the weeks ahead could be extremely nerve-wracking. And the fact is, if Bolsonaro eventually loses and chooses to fight the results, it is going to test the strength of Brazil's relatively young democracy. So, to the people there who are worried right now, let me address you in the two languages that I know you'll understand: Portuguese and, of course, the language of the chuck. So please, if you will bear with me. Hola, Brazil. Sou o apresentador samurai. Sinto muito pelo que vocês estão passando nesse momento. Nossos pensamentos estarão com vocês nas próximas semanas. Boa sorte. That is our show. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night. I just need to find the button. Is this it?